They sent 50 warships to capture one human. Within hours, they lost their first ship to a woman who shouldn't have been able to touch their systems. Admiral Vox watched his screen go dark as Commander Krell's final transmission crackled through. "Not what we thought. My ship is lost." Admiral Vox watched the battle formations ripple across the main display, the glow reflecting in his dark eyes. His command deck hummed with the low thrum of power systems operating at peak efficiency. Every station reported green. Every system functioned as designed. The air smelled of ozone and polished metal, the familiar scent of absolute control. 50 warships formed a perfect spherical formation around the target vector. Each vessel represented centuries of technological advancement, their armor capable of withstanding solar flares, and their weapons able to vaporize small moons. Deploying this armada against a single human vessel would be considered excessive by any tactical standard. This was the kind of force reserved for suppressing planetary rebellions, not retrieving one biological specimen. High Commander Ziv approached the command platform, his brow ridges furrowed in that annoying way that signaled doubt. "Admiral, forgive the observation, but the target vessel registers as primitive. Their technology barely qualifies as space-capable. This level of deployment seems disproportionate to the threat assessment." Ziv gestured toward the sensor display showing the human ship's pathetic energy signature, a flicker compared to the blazing stars of their own fleet. Vox didn't bother turning from the display. "The Science Directorate wants this specimen intact. They want no variables, no chances." His voice carried the flat certainty of someone who'd never faced meaningful opposition. "Their technology is generations behind ours. Their defenses are crude physical barriers that our phase shifters bypass effortlessly." He finally glanced at Ziv, a faint smirk touching his features. "This isn't about the threat. This is about sending a message about our capabilities." The tactical screens confirmed his assessment. The human vessel showed minimal energy output, no weapon signatures, and primitive propulsion systems. Their sensors couldn't even detect the fleet's advanced scanning pulses. To the hegemony systems, Hayes' ship appeared as nothing more than recycled scrap metal barely holding together in the vacuum. The fleet began its advance in perfect synchronous formation. Battlecruisers formed the outer perimeter, while faster interceptors created an inner containment web. Their movement wasn't just tactical, it was theatrical. The glowing lines of their engine trails painted intricate patterns in the void, a display meant to overwhelm any potential resistance through sheer spectacle. This was how the hegemony operated. Demonstrate overwhelming force, watch the opponent capitulate, then collect the spoils. Operation parameters specified a clean, surgical capture. No damage to the specimen, minimal disruption to surrounding space. Boarding teams had standing orders to use non-lethal suppression fields only. The Science Directorate required their prize conscious and undamaged for whatever experiments they planned. Every contingency plan assumed swift compliance, perhaps a token resistance easily neutralized by their superior technology. They anticipated the human would recognize the hopelessness of her situation. Standard first contact protocols suggested primitive species either fled or surrendered when confronted with advanced technology. Their psychological profiles indicated humans valued self-preservation above abstract concepts like honor or resistance. The operation would be concluded within hours, another successful retrieval for the archives. The stage was meticulously arranged for what should have been a routine demonstration of hegemony supremacy. Every variable appeared controlled, every outcome predicted by their advanced simulation matrices. They'd accounted for everything except the one factor their sensors couldn't measure and their computers couldn't model. The hunt commenced with the quiet confidence of predators who'd never encountered prey that could fight back. They closed the net around Cassandra Hayes, blind to the storm they were about to unleash upon themselves. Science Directorate footage captures exactly what happened next. The visual record shows a human female moving through stark metal corridors, while the station's automated defenses collapse around her. Internal systems fail in sequence around her position. Blast doors slam shut just after she passes through. Lighting arrays flicker and die. Security turrets power down without firing. She doesn't run. She doesn't hide. She walks at a steady pace as the station dismantles its own security measures. Alien security personnel collapse without visible cause. Their bodies hit the deck plating with heavy thuds that the audio pickups register clearly. No energy weapons fire, no projectile impacts, No physical contact from the human. The station's internal sensors show life signs terminating in perfect synchronization with her progress through the facility. Each termination corresponds to personnel positioned to intercept her. The pattern repeats with mathematical precision. Her expression remains calm throughout the engagement. She shows no sign of effort or strain. Her breathing stays even. Her movements maintain a consistent rhythm, as if she's taking a morning stroll through a park rather than moving through a catastrophic security breach. The footage shows her pausing once to look at a fallen alien guard, her head tilted slightly. The expression could be mistaken for pity if the context weren't so violently one-sided. Directorate analysts labeled the phenomenon a mystery weapon system. They assumed she carried some form of advanced technology that their sensors couldn't detect. Their initial reports speculated about neural disruptors or resonance emitters. They searched for energy signatures, weapon profiles, any conventional explanation for what their instruments recorded. The search yielded nothing but contradictory data and sensor ghosts. The security breach didn't come from external hacking or weaponized code. Station logs show no unauthorized access attempts through normal digital channels. The intrusion didn't follow known patterns of cyber warfare or electronic countermeasures. Defense systems didn't fail from overload or compromise. They simply stopped recognizing her as a threat and began recognizing their own personnel as hostile entities. The phenomenon centered on Hayes herself. Sensor arrays closest to her position registered abnormal energy readings that defied classification. The readings didn't match any known weapon system or technology in hegemony databases. They fluctuated in patterns that suggested biological rather than mechanical origin. The emissions seemed to interact directly with the station's systems without any interface technology. She became a walking source of irresistible command signals that overrode all security protocols. The visual record creates a disturbing contrast. Here's a biologically primitive species member with no apparent physical enhancements, no armor, no visible weapons, no combat training evident in her movement patterns. Yet she moves through a top security facility like she owns the infrastructure. Defense systems designed to stop battalion-level assaults fail to even slow her progress. The more advanced the technology arrayed against her, the more completely it seems to serve her purposes. Hayes operates with the inevitability of a natural disaster. She doesn't fight systems, she simply changes their fundamental operating parameters. Security systems become her escort. Communication networks become her announcement system. Environmental controls become her weapons. She demonstrates a relationship with technology that the hegemony's science cannot explain, let alone counter. The hunting fleet wasn't pursuing a fugitive. They were trying to contain a cascade failure that wore human skin. Their sensors tracked her ship while she moved through their own systems like a ghost haunting the machine. Every piece of technology they brought to bear became another potential weapon in her arsenal. Their advantage became their vulnerability. Their pursuit became their undoing. Commander Krell executed the interception with textbook precision. His boarding team deployed focused energy pulses that targeted the human vessel's propulsion systems. The shuttle's engines flickered and died within seconds, just as the tactical simulations predicted. The target hung motionless in space, a dormant piece of wreckage waiting for collection. On the bridge of the subtle incursion, status indicators glowed steady green. Krell's team reported all systems neutralized, the target completely disabled. The subtle incursion moved into docking position with the confidence of a predator moving in on trapped prey. Its magnetic grapplers extended toward the silent shuttle. Boarding teams stood ready at the airlocks, their weapons set to suppression mode as per Directorate protocols. Every sensor reading confirmed the human vessel posed no threat. Power levels registered at near zero. Weapon systems showed complete dormancy. Life signs indicated a single human occupant, resting calmly in what they assumed was resigned acceptance of capture. Then the shuttle system surged back to life with impossible suddenness. External lighting arrays blazed to full intensity. Engine ports glowed with reactor fire that shouldn't have been possible with disabled propulsion. Defense turrets that hadn't registered on any scan now swiveled into firing positions. The reactivation happened simultaneously across all systems, like a dead body suddenly sitting up and reaching for a weapon. Krell's boarding teams were caught in overlapping fields of fire from weapons that didn't exist moments earlier. Energy beams lanced from concealed ports on the shuttle's surface. The defense grid activated with coordination that suggested it had never been disabled at all. The subtle incursion's shields flared under unexpected bombardment. Hull breaches opened along the docking collar where the grapplers had made contact. Emergency alarms began shrieking across the command deck as damage reports flooded the tactical displays. A new signal cut through the emergency channels. The voice was female, calm, and spoke flawless hegemony standard with an accent they'd never heard before. "Hello, Commander." The words carried no stress, no emotion, just clear articulation. "I believe this is the part where you realize you have made a terrible mistake." The statement wasn't a threat. It was an observation, delivered with the certainty of someone watching a script play out exactly as written. Life support failed next. Atmospheric pressure dropped rapidly across the incursion's decks. Temperature controls spiked to lethal levels in some sections while freezing solid others. Engine control reported complete system lockout. The ship's own computers began executing emergency shutdown procedures that couldn't be overridden. The bridge crew scrambled to maintain basic functions as system after system went dark or actively worked against. Then Krell's final transmission reached the fleet command channel amid static and distorted audio. His voice sounded strained, breathing labored in thinning atmosphere. "Not what we thought." The words came between ragged gasps. "My ship is lost." The transmission cut with finality, replaced by the flat tone of a terminated signal. On the flagship's bridge, Admiral Vox watched the tactical display as the subtle incursion's icon switched from active green to catastrophic red. The ship's systems went completely dark, drifting powerless beside the now fully operational human vessel. The 50-ship fleet had become 49 in the span of 97 seconds. The Hunter had just lost its first tooth to the prey. Fleet intelligence officers worked through the sensor data from the incursion's final moments. They ran the recordings through every analytical filter they possessed. The energy surge that destroyed Krell's ship appeared on their screens as a complex waveform that refused categorization. It didn't match any known weapon signature in their extensive databases. The pattern resembled nothing they'd encountered across hundreds of campaigns and thousands of documented technologies. The energy didn't originate from the shuttle's reactors. Those systems registered as completely offline until milliseconds before the attack. It didn't come from weapons systems either. The shuttle's limited armament showed no activation signatures. The energy didn't even travel through normal space like conventional weapons fire. It simply appeared simultaneously across multiple systems aboard the incursion, as if the ship itself had spontaneously decided to self-destruct. Analysis revealed the impossible truth. The energy signature emanated from Cassandra Hayes' biological readings. Her life signs showed a corresponding spike at the exact moment the incursion systems failed. The energy output registered as a biological phenomenon, not a technological one. She wasn't operating a weapon, she was the weapon. The energy flowed from her consciousness directly into the ship's systems without any interface technology. This revelation broke every established law of Cedraxian physics. Biological entities couldn't generate that magnitude of energy output. Consciousness couldn't interact directly with machinery without neural interface technology. The energy signature defied conservation principles, appearing without apparent source or medium of transmission. Their science had no framework for what they were observing. Hayes operated outside every paradigm of warfare and physics they understood. Admiral Vox reviewed the intelligence report with growing disbelief. He ordered a complete psychological profile on human species capabilities, something no fleet commander had ever requested. The briefing team brought everything available from the Science Directorate archives. The data showed a species with primitive technology and limited psychic potential, according to their metrics. Nothing in the files explained what they were witnessing aboard Hayes' shuttle. The nature of the engagement shifted completely. This wasn't about capturing a fugitive anymore. It was about understanding a phenomenon that threatened their entire technological advantage. They needed to comprehend how she operated, not just where she was located. Tactical planning switched from containment strategies to research parameters. Every ship in the fleet received new standing orders. Gather data first, engage only as necessary. Standard warfare tactics became immediately obsolete. Weapons designed to overwhelm shields and armor had no effect on a threat that bypassed physical defenses entirely. Boarding actions risked putting more personnel within range of whatever capability Hayes possessed. Electronic warfare systems might actually strengthen her abilities rather than counter them. Their entire military doctrine assumed technological superiority as the decisive factor. Hayes demonstrated that technology itself could be turned against them. The resolution came with chilling clarity. Hayes's power existed internally, a weapon system that required no external components, no ammunition, and no recharge time. She carried it within her biological framework, making it impossible to disarm or disable through conventional means. Their scanners couldn't detect it, their shields couldn't block it, and their weapons couldn't destroy it. Conventional warfare had no answer for this threat. Their ships, their weapons, their technology, all became potential liabilities rather than assets. The hunter suddenly found itself armed with tools that only made the prey more dangerous. The 50-ship fleet now faced a single human who could turn their own advanced systems against them with a thought. Admiral Vox stood before the tactical display, the glowing icons of his fleet now representing questions rather than power. The confidence that had filled the command deck hours earlier had evaporated like oxygen from a breached hull. Brute force had failed spectacularly. The traditional hegemony approach of overwhelming technological superiority had proven not just ineffective but potentially suicidal against this opponent. A new strategy was required, one that acknowledged they were facing something beyond their tactical manuals. He authorized Operation Silent Hunt, a complete departure from their initial approach. The plan divided the remaining ships into two distinct groups with separate missions. 5 stealth-class vessels would go completely dark, cutting all non-essential systems and emissions. Their mission was pure reconnaissance, track Hayes's movements without detection, map her capabilities, and identify patterns in her behavior. They would operate like predators stalking unfamiliar prey, observing before engaging. The main fleet would maintain engagement protocols but with critical modifications. All automated systems were to be deactivated wherever possible. Manual controls replaced computer-assisted targeting. Human, or rather alien, judgment would override automated responses. The standing order was clear. If a system could operate without computer control, it would. This was a fleet-wide acknowledgement that their technology had become a vulnerability. Rather than an advantage, the tactical formation shifted to a pincer configuration designed to limit Hayes's options without presenting concentrated targets. Ships positioned themselves across multiple vectors, creating overlapping fields of observation and engagement. The strategy focused on containment rather than capture, recognizing that simply limiting her movement represented progress against an enemy who turned their strength against them. They deployed proximity mines along predicted transit routes, each weapon system isolated from network control. The mines operated on independent trigger mechanisms without central coordination. This fragmentation of their own systems was a defensive measure born from painful experience. Krell's fate had demonstrated the danger of interconnected systems against an enemy who could compromise them instantly. The story of the subtle incursion's destruction became required reading across the fleet. Commanders reviewed the sensor logs not as a failure, but as a lesson in what not to do. Krell's assumption that technology guaranteed superiority had cost his ship and crew. That arrogance was now a cautionary tale repeated in every briefing. The message was clear. Respect the threat, study the opponent, and never assume technological advantage translates to tactical superiority. Intelligence gathering became the fleet's primary mission. Every sensor array was retasked to collect data on Hayes's capabilities rather than merely track her position. Specialists analyzed energy patterns, system interactions, and even the psychological profile constructed from her communications. They were building a database on an enemy who defied categorization, piece by painful piece. The hunt transformed from a military operation into a high-stakes game of multidimensional chess. Each move required considering not just spatial positioning but technological vulnerability, psychological factors, and capabilities they didn't fully understand. Vox found himself thinking several moves ahead, anticipating not what Hayes would do but what she could do with the assets they inevitably brought to bear against her. The 49 remaining ships became both hunters and potential weapons that could be turned against them. Every system activation, every weapon deployment, every electronic emission represented risk. They were learning to fight an enemy who used their own strength against them, adapting tactics from an era before automated warfare, when victory depended on cleverness rather than processing power. The hunter had become the student, and the lesson was proving costly. Hayes's shuttle drifted into proximity of an automated mining outpost, one of thousands scattered through the system. The facility was a standard hegemony operation, robotic extractors, basic refining systems, minimal crew presence. The recon ships tracking her registered the approach and assumed she was desperate for resources. Their tactical projections suggested she needed reactor fuel or raw materials for repairs. They expected her to attempt a resource grab, something their containment teams could easily intercept and exploit. Instead, the outpost's power signature surged beyond design specifications. Reactor output spiked to levels that should have triggered automatic shutdowns. The safety protocols failed to engage. Energy readings climbed into the catastrophic range, well past any operational parameters. The mining lasers, designed for precise mineral extraction, began firing at full continuous power without targeting protocols. Their beams sliced through empty space in erratic patterns that made no operational sense. Probes detected the formation of a gravitational anomaly near the outpost's core. The distortion didn't match any known natural phenomenon or weapon system. It warped local spacetime in unpredictable ways, pulling debris and energy discharges into unstable orbits around the facility. The anomaly seemed to feed on the outpost's power systems, growing stronger as the reactors approached meltdown. Sensors recorded spacetime curvature that defied existing physics models. The proximity mines positioned along Hayes's predicted course began detonating prematurely. Their independent trigger systems, designed specifically to avoid network vulnerability, activated without apparent cause. The detonations followed a cascading pattern that suggested coordinated timing rather than random malfunction. Each explosion triggered the next mine in sequence, creating a chain reaction that turned the strategically placed defensive field into an expanding wave of destruction. Containment ships positioned to intercept. Hayes found themselves caught in the cascading detonations. Their shields, calibrated to withstand anticipated weapon systems, buckled under the unexpected bombardment from their own mines. Hulls designed to deflect energy weapons fractured under concussive blasts from multiple directions. 3 ships were torn apart within seconds, their debris adding to the destructive field spreading through the engagement zone. The carefully prepared trap had sprung on the hunters instead of the prey. Hayes had demonstrated a new capability. She could weaponize infrastructure that wasn't even designed for combat. The mining outpost, a civilian installation with minimal defenses, became more lethal than a battleship under her influence. She turned industrial systems into instruments of destruction, using methods the hegemony couldn't anticipate or counter. Her approach showed complete mastery over any technological system, regardless of its original purpose. Admiral Vox watched the tactical display as another 3 ships vanished from the formation. The carefully maintained containment strategy was collapsing into chaos. He issued the retreat order himself, his voice tight with controlled urgency. The remaining ships broke formation, moving to safe distances from the expanding destruction. The coordinated hunt had become a disorganized withdrawal, with captains prioritizing survival over mission objectives. The realization settled across the fleet command network. Hayes could turn any system into a weapon. Mining facilities, communication relays, navigation beacons, anything with power systems and basic automation became potential ammunition. There was no safe technological environment to engage her in. Every piece of hegemony infrastructure within her reach represented another potential battlefield. Advantage for their enemy. A single transmission, cut across all fleet. Channels moments after the retreat order. The voice was calm, clear, and utterly without emotion. Cassandra Hayes sends her regards. The message contained no threats, no demands, no negotiations. It was simply an observation of facts delivered with the certainty of someone who knew exactly how this engagement would end. The transmission terminated as cleanly as it began, leaving only static and the growing reality of their situation. A single name began appearing in intercepted transmissions from Hayes's shuttle. The words "New Horizons" surfaced in communications, spoken with a particular inflection that suggested significance beyond the phrase itself. It wasn't a tactical command or strategic objective. It was a whisper, a reference point that carried emotional weight in her transmissions. The pattern recognition systems flagged it as anomalous content worth investigation. Fleet intelligence ran the name through every database they possessed. Central records contained no colony designation matching that terminology. Sector archives showed no registered outposts or settlements using that identification. Historical files contained no reference to any operation or project bearing that name. The words didn't appear in any official documentation across centuries of colonial expansion and administration. They were hunting a ghost reference that shouldn't exist. Deeper investigation revealed something more disturbing than a simple data gap. The name appeared in fragments, deleted mission logs, corrupted personnel files, redacted experiment reports. Intelligence analysts found echoes of the term in places where information should have been complete. The pattern suggested systematic removal of records, but imperfect execution left traces behind like fingerprints at a crime scene. Each fragment pointed toward something the hegemony had tried to erase completely. The truth emerged from cross-referencing these fragments with missing persons reports and unexplained vessel disappearances. New Horizons wasn't a real colony. It was a cover designation for abduction operations. The name served as bureaucratic justification for retrieving test subjects from developing species. Official documentation listed thousands of individuals as relocated to New Horizons colony, when they had actually been transported to research facilities for experimentation. The paperwork created a fiction of voluntary colonization while concealing forced experimentation. The scale of the deception became apparent through statistical analysis. Population transfer records showed consistent patterns of disappearances following first contact scenarios. Entire families vanished from frontier settlements after initial surveys. The numbers reached into the thousands across multiple species over decades of operation. Each disappearance was logged under the same administrative category, creating the illusion of a thriving colony that never actually existed. The paperwork was perfect, consistent, and completely fabricated. The Science Directorate had constructed an empire on this foundation of lies. Their advanced technology, their military dominance, their supposed ethical superiority, all were built using resources stolen under false pretenses. The very standards they enforced upon developing species were violated systematically by their own operations. The moral high ground they claimed in interstellar relations was revealed as theatrical performance, covering horrific practices. This was the core of Hayes' motivation. Her actions weren't random violence or simple survival tactics. Each ship destroyed, each facility compromised, each system overthrown represented retribution for specific crimes. She wasn't lashing out at random targets. She was systematically dismantling the apparatus that had enabled these atrocities. The precision of her attacks matched the precision of the record-keeping that had concealed the crimes. The nature of the conflict shifted from military engagement to personal reckoning. Hayes wasn't fighting the hegemony because they were chasing her. She was making them pay for what they'd done to her people. Every transmission, every maneuver, every demonstration of her capabilities was part of a calculated campaign of justice. The hunter had become the instrument of retribution for crimes the hunted had committed. She carried the weight of thousands with her in that small shuttle. Each life lost to the experiments, each person who disappeared into the fabrication of New Horizons, became part of her campaign. This wasn't one woman against a fleet. It was the collective rage of all the victims finally finding expression through the one person who could deliver it. The solitary figure on their screens represented an army of the wronged. The hegemony hadn't just encountered a dangerous opponent. They had created the perfect instrument of their own judgment. Hayes embodied both the crime and the punishment, a product of their experiments turned against them, a living testament to their moral failure. The 50 ships weren't hunting a fugitive. They were facing the consequences of their own actions, given form and consciousness and terrible power. A new transmission hit every ship in the fleet simultaneously, bypassing all security protocols. The signal carried a simple data packet addressed specifically to Project Ascension and the Science Directorate. It arrived not as an attack but as a delivery, clean and precise like evidence presented in court. The transmission headers showed origin point as Hayes' shuttle, but the routing indicated it had been prepared long before this engagement began. The files within contained detailed experiment logs from Project Ascension. They showed systematic neural enhancement procedures performed on sentient subjects without consent. Each file documented attempts to expand consciousness beyond natural limits through forced technological integration. The procedures utilized advanced interface technology to rewrite neural pathways, attempting to create artificial technopathic abilities in species that didn't possess them naturally. The research notes describe these operations as pushing the boundaries of cognitive science. Test subject mortality rates approached 87% across the documented experiments. The logs recorded subjects expiring from neural overload, system rejection, or psychological collapse. Researchers noted these outcomes as acceptable losses in pursuit of their objectives. They referred to the deceased as necessary sacrifices for scientific advancement. The files contained cold clinical assessments of beings who died screaming as their minds were torn apart by foreign technology. The project's ultimate goal became clear through internal communications between senior staff. They sought to establish permanent interspecies supremacy through manufactured technopathy. The plan involved creating a controlled population of enhanced beings who could interface directly with hegemony technology, making them dependent on systems only the Directorate could provide. This technological dependence would guarantee compliance and eliminate the need for conventional military control over developing species. First contact protocols were revealed as systematic conquest operations. The friendly surveys, cultural exchanges, and technology sharing were carefully orchestrated deceptions. Their true purpose was identifying species with potential for neural enhancement and assessing which populations could be harvested for experimentation. The protocols provided the perfect cover for identifying test subjects while maintaining the illusion of ethical engagement. Colonies were treated as disposable resources in these operations. Settlement support came with mandatory participation in voluntary enhancement programs. Populations that resisted faced resource cutoffs or manufactured disasters that conveniently provided test subjects from the survivors. The files showed entire communities designated for experimentation based on their genetic compatibility with the enhancement technology. Their value was measured in usable subjects per 1,000 population. This was the comprehensive moral indictment Hayes delivered to the entire fleet. She wasn't just revealing crimes, she was providing documented evidence that could not be dismissed as fabrication or exaggeration. Every officer receiving this transmission now possessed proof of systematic atrocities committed under the banner of scientific progress. The files contained dates, locations, authorization codes, and participant names. Her own capabilities were revealed as a product of this horrific science. The files contained references to a survivor from Batch 7, subject designation Hayes 734, who exhibited unexpected integration with the enhancement technology. The notes described unprecedented neural adaptation that allowed complete technopathic control without interface hardware. The researchers considered this outcome both breakthrough and failure. They had created exactly what they wanted but couldn't control it. Hayes stood as living proof of their success and failure. She represented the ultimate achievement of Project Ascension, a being who could interface with any technology through thought alone. But she also demonstrated the fatal flaw in their plan. You cannot create a weapon and expect it to serve you willingly. They had built the perfect instrument of technological control, and she had turned it against her creators. The Hunter fleet now understood what they faced. They weren't fighting some unknown alien phenomenon or mysterious weapon system. They were confronting their own science, their own ambition, their own moral failure given form and purpose. Every ship they lost, every system she compromised, every tactic she overturned was ultimately their creation working as designed, just not for their benefit. The weapon had chosen its own targets. The archival dossier pulled from deep storage contained actual names, not just subject numbers. Most project files listed test cases with alphanumeric designations that stripped away identity. This file was different. It showed photographs, biographical information, family connections. These were people with histories, not just experimental data points. The difference in documentation suggested these subjects were special cases, perhaps volunteers rather than random acquisitions from the population harvesting operations. Elizabeth and John Hayes appeared in the records as consenting participants in early enhancement trials. Their files indicated they were researchers who volunteered for neural interface testing. The documentation painted them as pioneers willing to risk themselves for scientific advancement. Their psychological profiles suggested idealistic personalities who believed in the project's stated goals of interspecies cooperation through technological unity. They signed waivers, attended briefings, and entered the program with documented enthusiasm. The truth emerged from cross-referencing their files with medical logs and security footage. They weren't volunteers. They were brought in after their daughter showed unusual aptitude during standard testing. The project leads wanted to study familial patterns in neural adaptation. When the Hazies learned the true nature of the experiments, they attempted to remove their daughter from the program. Security footage showed them being restrained and sedated after a confrontation with project staff. Their status changed from volunteers to prisoners within hours. They died during simultaneous enhancement procedures, scheduled as punishment for their resistance. Medical logs listed cause of death as neural cascade failure, a known risk of the technology. The timing suggested the procedures were intentionally pushed beyond safety limits. Project administrators noted their termination with clinical detachment, focusing on the data collected rather than the lives lost. Their daughter witnessed the entire event from observation, according to security logs that showed a child held by technicians as her parents expired on monitoring screens. Cassandra Hayes survived the project that killed her parents. She inherited the enhanced capabilities that destroyed them, her neural architecture adapting where theirs had failed. Project notes described her as the first complete success case, though they recommended increased security protocols due to observed psychological trauma from witnessing her parents' deaths. She became both prize and prisoner, the living proof their technology worked and a reminder of the cost. Her campaign across hegemony space was personal vengeance, but it also served as testament to her parents' sacrifice. Each system she compromised, each ship she destroyed, each facility she exposed honored their memory. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was completing the resistance her parents began when they tried to protect her. Their failed attempt to stop the project became her successful campaign to destroy it. She stood as living evidence of both the project's achievement and its crimes. Her capabilities demonstrated the technology worked exactly as designed. Her actions demonstrated why it never should have been created. She embodied the perfect weapon they wanted to build, and the perfect judgment for having built it. Every demonstration of her power was also a demonstration of their fatal ethical failure. This personal tragedy fueled her strategic fury. The cold efficiency of her attacks, the precision of her targeting, the relentlessness of her advance, all drew energy from that moment in the laboratory. She fought with the focused intensity of someone who had everything taken from her, and therefore had nothing left to lose. The hegemony had created an opponent who could not be reasoned with, bribed, or threatened because they had already taken everything that mattered to her. Every outpost she wrecked represented another lie exposed. Every ship she destroyed represented another life stolen. Every system she compromised represented another abuse of power. The lone figure on their sensors was never truly alone. She carried the memory of her parents with her, and through them all the other victims of Project Ascension. Their stolen lives became her ammunition. Their stolen futures became her resolve. Her war was ultimately a daughter's promise kept. Somewhere in those laboratories, watching her parents die, she had made a commitment to make their captors pay. The 50-ship fleet wasn't hunting a dangerous fugitive. They were facing the consequence of a child's witness to atrocity, grown into a woman's capacity for retribution. The hunters were learning that some weapons once created cannot be controlled. Some debts once incurred must be paid in full. Admiral Vox stood in his ready room, the latest intelligence reports glowing on the display. The data showed the full scope of Project Ascension, the disappearances, the experiments, the cover-up operations. He read through mission logs that described sentient beings as test subjects rather than people. He saw the authorization codes from officials he'd respected. The weight of command felt heavier than any gravity well. This wasn't just tactical failure. This was moral collapse. He called his second-in-command to the room. Nexer entered with the cautious step of someone who'd seen too many ships vanish from the tracking displays. The two officers stood before the evidence, the glow of the screens reflecting in their eyes. The usual confident posture of command was gone, replaced by the stillness of men confronting uncomfortable truth. "We created this situation, Nexer." The words cost Vox something to say. They weren't just an admission, they were an indictment of everything he'd served. His career, his victories, his command philosophy all rested on the assumption of hegemony superiority. That foundation was now ash. The confidence that had guided 50 ships into pursuit now felt like arrogance. The technological advantage he'd relied on was built on atrocities. The Directorate's deception went deeper than anyone had imagined. They hadn't just concealed a few questionable experiments. They'd built entire false histories, fabricated colonies, created bureaucratic structures designed to hide systematic exploitation. The scale of the cover-up suggested this was policy, not aberration. The very institutions that were supposed to uphold ethical standards were the ones violating them most severely. Grand Admiral Z's communication arrived as they reviewed the files. The message didn't offer reinforcements or new tactics. It acknowledged that Hayes's demonstration had forced a reckoning that should have happened generations earlier. The tone was unprecedented, not defensive, not angry, but contemplative. The highest level of command was admitting they might have been wrong about their entire approach to interspecies relations. Fleet Command initiated a full ethics review of contact protocols. For the first time, they were questioning the fundamental assumption that technological superiority granted moral authority. They were examining the conquest model that had governed their expansion for centuries. The questions weren't about how to improve their techniques, but whether those techniques should exist at all. This was philosophical questioning at the operational level, something that had never happened in hegemony military history. The fortress of absolute certainty began crumbling from within. Officers who had never questioned orders found themselves examining the moral foundations of those commands. The confidence that had propelled their expansion across star systems was replaced by uneasy doubt. The technological gap they'd always viewed as proof of their superiority now looked like evidence of ethical failure. Their advancement had come at a cost they were only beginning to understand. Vox faced the truth he'd helped build. His successful career, his command position, the ships he'd led into battle, all were products of a system based on exploitation. Every planet brought into the hegemony, every species guided toward their standards, every demonstration of technological might, all were part of the machine that produced Project Ascension. He wasn't just fighting Hayes, he was facing the consequences of his own compliance. The hunter finally saw the trap clearly. They had constructed their own nemesis through arrogance and ethical blindness. They had created the perfect opponent using their own science, their own resources, their own flawed assumptions. The pursuit was never going to end with capture because it was never really about the human they were chasing. It was about confronting what they had become. This engagement was no longer about neutralizing a threat or completing a mission. It was about atonement for crimes most of them hadn't known they were committing. The remaining ships weren't hunting weapons, they were facing consequences. Every system Hayes compromised, every facility she exposed, every lie she revealed was part of a reckoning that was long overdue. The military operation had become a moral examination, and they were failing spectacularly. The authorization came directly from the highest command level, bypassing all normal channels. Grand Admiral Z's seal appeared on the directive with the finality of a verdict. The order didn't call for reinforcements or tactical adjustments. It mandated a complete review of all interspecies protocols, something that hadn't happened since the hegemony's expansion began centuries earlier. The document carried the weight of permanent policy change rather than temporary adjustment. Every piece of information related to Project Ascension would be declassified immediately. All research data, experiment logs, and subject files were to become public record across all member systems. The directive specified no redactions, no exceptions, no delayed releases. The truth would emerge complete and unedited, regardless of the damage to reputations or institutions. This level of transparency was unprecedented in hegemony governance, where information control had always been a primary tool of administration. The Science Directorate would be dissolved entirely. Its assets would be redistributed, its personnel reassigned, its authority broken into separate oversight committees. The reorganization plan placed scientists under direct supervision of ethical review boards with multi-species representation. Research would continue, but under constraints that prioritized consent and transparency over results. The institution that had driven their technological supremacy would now operate under limitations it had never accepted before. Oversight would come from representative species rather than hegemony appointments. Former subject species would have voting positions on all research and contact committees. Their representatives would possess veto power over projects involving their people or territories. This shifted the balance of power fundamentally, giving developing species actual control over their relationship with advanced technology. The paternalistic model of guidance was replaced with collaborative governance. This represented a revolutionary change in how the hegemony operated. The entire framework of interspecies relations shifted from hierarchical to cooperative. The assumption of technological superiority granting moral authority was formally abandoned. Policies that had stood for generations were being rewritten in days, not because of political pressure, but because they had been proven morally bankrupt by their own actions. The change wasn't evolutionary, it was foundational demolition and reconstruction. Hayes's demands became clear through this transformation. She hadn't been seeking vengeance despite the destruction she'd caused. Every ship lost, every facility compromised, every system overthrown served a specific purpose, demonstrating that the old model couldn't stand against its own consequences. Her campaign was surgical reform executed with extreme prejudice. She showed them their weakness wasn't military but ethical, and then forced them to address it. She wanted accountability for specific crimes, not random punishment. The declassification of Project Ascension served this purpose perfectly. Those responsible would face judgment not from her but from their own legal systems and the galaxy at large. The truth would accomplish what weapons could not: permanent change in how power was exercised and monitored across civilized space. Reparations would follow accountability. The directive included provisions for compensating families affected by the project, returning seized assets, and rebuilding communities damaged by their policies. This wasn't symbolic gesture. It was practical acknowledgement that harm required material repair as well as philosophical change. The economic cost would be substantial, but necessary for genuine reconciliation. The relationship between advanced and developing species would be redefined completely. No more conquest disguised as guidance, no more experimentation disguised as advancement. Contact would proceed from mutual interest rather than assumed superiority. The galaxy would operate through cooperation because coercion had proven ultimately self-destructive. The apex predator model of galactic relations ended that day. The belief that stronger species naturally dominated weaker ones died with the exposed truth of Project Ascension. Their technological advantage became a responsibility rather than a weapon, a tool for building rather than controlling. The hunters learned that some prey carries consequences too severe to risk pursuing. The galaxy would now be shaped by mutual interest rather than unilateral force. Cooperation replaced coercion as the operating principle of interspecies relations. This wasn't idealism. It was practical necessity demonstrated through 49 ships learning that some opponents cannot be defeated, only understood. Some truths cannot be contained, only acknowledged. Some changes cannot be avoided, only accepted.